James F. Burns, Sr., September 9th, 1927 to April 14th, 2005. Autobiographical journal entry typed by Tom Burns, son of James F. Burns, Sr. June 28th, 2001. I have decided to sit down and write some sort of journal describing my life. I have always thought this was the peak of self-importance, but this is not about that sort of thing. My brother Terry put together a family history that described in general and based upon his knowledge our family history. I hope to give more details and maybe some sort of humor. I was born in Upper Alton on Edwards Street, September 9th, 27. My dad owned an electrical contracting company and partnered with a man named Gorman. My recollection was Gorman took off with his share plus whatever he could get his hands on when the Great Depression hit, probably 31 or 32. We lost our house on Edwards Street and moved to Summer Cottage owned by relatives. Spent a summer and part of a fall there, then moved to a place in Godfrey owned by the Walsh family, relatives of my dad. I went to kindergarten when I lived on Edwards and Alton, then to a one-room country school, first grade, in Godfrey, taught by Angie Walsh. I can remember walking to school and some mornings walking over to get milk in a pail at a neighbor's barn. Second grade through 8th grade was at St. Patrick's in Alton. My dad had to drive Bob and me. We lived in Godfrey until I was about 12, then moved to Young's place outside Upper Alton off Humbert Road and Seminary Road. When we moved into Godfrey House, no inside plumbing, well water. Well was about 80 feet away. 4 rooms down and 4 rooms up. It was brand new, was wired for electric, but had no power. We used kerosene lamps and heated water on a stove in the kitchen, no indoor plumbing. We put down newspapers on the floor and raised chickens in a room upstairs. When they were old enough, we moved them out to a shed in the back of the house. We had many adventures in that place. We drew our water from a well 80 feet deep. Had a snake in the basket a couple of times. I caught an axe for Christmas one year and took it out to cut down a tree and wound up splitting my knee. Bob and I built a lean-to camp out in. Tried all sorts of things while camping. Randy was born in that house in Godfrey and in one of the downstairs rooms. I can still remember my mother crying out while in labor. Life wasn't easy in those days. As hard as times were for us, we took in my dad's folks, Uncle Tyne, Aunt Edith, and Percy, and Baby, Grandmother Hanlon, Uncle John and Jim, Auntie Ann, and Uncle Leo. People came and went. We all shared because we had to share to survive. Today we are in the midst of great prosperity, but times go through cycles, and bad times will return, etc. Those who can't make it today will almost certainly go under when times are bad. Part of nature, the strong survive. No wimps. When we raised chickens in Godfrey, my dad had a Ford panel truck. He would bring home bags of chicken feed, his own blend, or he would bring home 10-gallon milk cans with skim milk. We would allow the milk to sour, then feed it to the chickens. When he came home, he and I would unload the truck as I was the oldest and strongest, therefore expected. We were poor folks then. Dad couldn't get a job at the factory because he had lost his vision in his right eye. Dad went into the Army in World War I and went into what was OCS to become a lieutenant at that time. The war ended before OCS was over. He passed the eye exam by memorizing the eye chart. It meant a lot to him, and it meant a lot to me that we would volunteer to defend our country in time of war. My dad lost his right eye before he met my mother. He rode the streetcar in the morning to St. Louis, had his eye removed in a doctor's office, and rode home on the streetcar to Alton. In those days, you had to be tough to survive. He lost his eye as the result of defending his younger brother, Uncle Tyne, John K. Burns. The boy picking on Tyne hit my dad across the nose with an umbrella, giving him a black eye and killing the blood supply to the eye. In those days, older boys were taught to defend younger members of their family. I was raised that way. I was taught to fight for myself and younger siblings, part of my Irish heritage. Today, kids are taught to turn the other cheek. My dad was highly respected part of the Upper Alton Chamber of Commerce. For example, every year, he would put up Christmas tree lights on the streets in Upper Alton. I earned my first money helping put together 110-volt tree lights for Christmas. We left Alton and moved to Ottawa in 1942. We left Godfrey probably in 1939 and moved to Young Place on Seminary Road in Upper Alton, and we moved into the very nice house with 5 rooms downstairs, a kitchen, a dining room, 1 bedroom, 2 nice sitting rooms, and 3 rooms upstairs, all bedrooms with a full basement. 2 barns, 1 paved with brick, a small hired hand's house, a shed, a large privy. We had electric lights but no running water, a well outside about 80 feet deep, and a cistern that we could use. I remember one evening we were living in Godfrey, going home through North Alton, and we saw a tornado approaching. We were in a sedan, Dad, Mother, Grandmother Hanlon, Bob, and I. We turned into a side street and parked. We watched a front porch ripped off from a house and floated down the street. A huge tree was across the highway, and water was about a foot deep. Needless to say, we were late getting home. We had many adventures while I was growing up in Godfrey. When the wheat was cut next to our place, Bob and I went over and shocked wheat. This means putting bundles of wheat, stems and all, into stacks. It stood and dried, then the thrasher came along and processed it into kernels and straw. We grew all of our own veggies: asparagus, tomatoes, lettuce, beans, peas, corn, etc. When we moved to Seminary Road, we quit raising vegetables. Times were better. The Big Depression was over. We lived in a large house, had 2 huge barns, on and on. We still raised chickens and pigs and separated the barn into separate cages, ups and downs. Access to the upper loft was by a ladder. Imagine hauling water and feed to the chickens up the ladder, 2 buckets at a time. Eventually, the barn burned down while my folks were on vacation. Times were better. This was their first vacation that I ever heard of. The loss, this was in 1941, was over $10,000. That would be 10 or 20 times that much in today's dollars. We continue to live there. My grandmother Hanlon and Uncle John Hanlon live with us. After World War II started, Dad went to Chicago to find work. He couldn't work locally because he had trouble with the IBEW local during the Big Depression. He couldn't work for a shop because they had no work, and the union wouldn't find work for himself. They threatened him with a beating. He threatened to shoot them. I think this is my basis for my belief in private ownership and carry of a handgun. A private citizen must be allowed to protect himself, his family, and his property. In the summer of 1942, my dad took me to work construction. I was only 14 and not legally old enough. I made $1 per hour, 70 hours per week. 1.5 times over 40 hours later, $85 per week. No income tax and only $2 a week Social Security. The only deduction was for Social Security. I believe that was about 2 or so. Whatever I made paid my room and board where we worked in Seneca, Illinois. I was given $5 a week spending money and the rest into the family kitty. Another thing I didn't mention, last night we had a dinner here at home, and I mentioned that when I grew up, there were very few vets. We never took a pet to the vet, didn't have money for that sort of thing. If they got sick, they either got well or they were shot and buried. In September 1942, we moved to Ottawa, 519 Guthrie Street, and I started high school. A small town where everyone knew everyone else except me, the new boy. It was hard and different, and I didn't do well. I missed Alton, familiar sights, and old friends. I made new friends, not necessarily good people. I had no money of my own and didn't do well in school. In 1943 summer, did nothing. Too young to work in the shipyard, went to the beach in a quarry. Discovered girls, so what? That fall, a junior in high school, I worked in a drugstore. Met several girls, none special, from Streeters, LaSalle, and Peru. I made about $8 a week. In 1944 in the summer, I worked in the shipyard, built LSTs, rode to work in my dad's 1936 Dodge panel truck. Uncle John worked there, Bill Green, my buddies, Bill Addison, and Don Whaley. I made money in the shipyard, about $55 a week, but I didn't get to keep much of it. It again went home to the family kitty. It didn't matter. I had some pretty good times. That fall, I went to work for Sears Roebuck. Terry was born in that time period, and my grandmother moved in with us. She had fallen and broken her hip. With a new baby, Terry, and my invalid grandmother, and my Uncle John living with us, working at the shipyard, Mother had her hands full. Remember, the things we take for granted, at least a lot of them, weren't available. Gas was rationed to 4 gallons per car per month. Defense workers were able to get more. Meat and sugar was rationed, shoes were rationed. We had a furnace that used crushed coal. I had to keep it full and clean the furnace box. I worked at Sears during the summer of 1945 and had a girlfriend, Mary Coonies. Time was running out. I had to go into the Navy before I turned 18 or be drafted into the Army. World War II was still going on, and my folks were reluctant to let me go. I couldn't sign up without their written okay. They gave it, and I went to Great Lakes Naval Training Center. Home on leave on Christmas, still going steady with Mary, went back and shipped out to a replacement depot in Shoemaker, California. From there to Hawthorne, Nevada, ammo depot. We shuffled ammo, loaded boxcars with ammo, everything from 30-06 to 16-inch cannon. We got a letter from Mary. She was getting married. Shipped out there to Oakland, NAS, California. Worked there as a master of arms, sort of a base cop. I was discharged and went home in time to start college at Shutliff in Upper Dalton. This was a new experience. I had goofed off in high school and got a GED and entered college. Oddly enough, I was able to get by in spite of the tremendous competition. In an algebra class, first day, we couldn't all get into the classroom. Everyone wanted to go to college. By the end of the semester, those that couldn't compete dropped out, and we all had seats. From a starting class of about 75 or 80, probably 35 survived, and I was making passing grades in all subjects. But I, for some ridiculous reason, was discouraged and quit. Another of my dumb mistakes. I went to work on the railroad as a section hand in 1947. Worked there all summer, did okay, but quit and went to work for Western Electric, installing telephone offices, just after getting a raise from 80 cents an hour to the top wage of 82 per hour. The foreman was astounded, but I couldn't imagine working there during the winter. I worked all over Illinois and part of Indiana, saved money and bought my first car, a 1940 Pontiac 6-cylinder. Met girls and lived the single life. Good times, but was tired of living out of town and quit. Moved back home and got a job in a steel mill in Alton. Again, just labor, but was starting to get some of my ambition. I bought a 1948 convertible Ford, and started meeting a lot of girls. I got a call from Mary, my old girlfriend from Ottawa. She was divorced and wanted to get back together. I went up and spent a weekend in Ottawa. I met with her at her folks' house. She was living there. We went out and talked a lot. What I didn't realize was that she had a baby boy. That wasn't mentioned. I didn't find that out until we met when Dottie and I went back to 1955 high school reunion, when we and Dottie went out to dinner with Mary and her present husband. Since then, she and I have corresponded by email, and she made me aware of happenings in Ottawa. In the last 2 weeks, 2 boys or men I knew have both died. Funny, I hadn't even thought of them in 50 years. Still, it's interesting to know what has happened back there. To resume the tale, when I met Dottie, I was dating another woman, a really nice person. But after Dottie and I met, I immediately focused on Dottie. We just clicked. The perfect woman for me. Her folks didn't approve. I was older, smoked, drank, and was a Catholic. They were Baptists. My folks didn't approve because she was a Baptist. She decided to turn Catholic after we were married. I, in the meantime, took written tests for USAF pilot school. 12 of us took the test, 5 passed. After the written test, I went to Scott Air Force Base for a 5-day physical and passed that. Then waited for notice to report for flight training. The class consisted of 75 young men, and the first 4 weeks were PE to see who would be weeded out. Over the weeks, PE, lecture, and finally flight training. The class was trimming down to 25. That was when they caught me. We had former AF and Navy pilots in the class, ex-pro football players, ex-pro basketball players, crop dusters, and they cut way down to the bone. Dottie and I decided to get married. I got a job in the shop at McDonald in St. Louis. We were married December 30th, 1950 at St. Patrick's Church in Alton. We had a 3-bedroom apartment on Main Street in Alton and settled in as married folks. Dottie worked at the YMCA in Alton. I started taking flying lessons and wound up buying a P-26, a 200 horsepower low-wing trainer. I flew Cessnas, odd varieties, the PT, and a BT-13, 450 horsepower, and an AT-6, 650 horsepower, low-wing. Accumulated several hundred hours, but realized that my eyes were deteriorating and I wouldn't be able to pass the eye exam as a commercial pilot, so I went back to college. I attended Shurtleff College in Alton for 3 years, then transferred to Park College of Aeronautical Technology in East St. Louis, part of St. Louis U. In 1956, I went to work for Emerson Electronics as a beginning engineer, continuing night classes at St. Louis U. Worked there until 1958. Then I took a job with Lockheed Space Division in Sunnyvale. By then, we had accumulated rugrats: Stephanie, 51, Lisa, 1954, and Jimmy, 1956, and Michael was on the way. I neglected to mention that while I was going to school, I worked at Western Cartridge evening shift, and we lived in a small apartment Dottie's dad had built for us. In 1956, my folks had given us a lot, a half an acre, and I built a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, living room, dining, and kitchen, full basement, and double garage. Took 2 years to build. Then we moved to California, Sunnyvale. Going to school 16 to 21 hours while working full-time with little kids is not something I would recommend for anyone. The kids suffer, the marriage suffers, and the student suffers with 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night. I have been very disappointed that my children didn't grab the opportunity to go to college. They had no idea how much difference it would have made in the rest of their lives. And I see the grandkids not taking it very seriously. Life is full of disappointments. While I was working in Sunnyvale, I took night classes at San Jose State. Then, when we moved to Seattle area, I took night classes at Seattle U. I think you have to have a hunger for knowledge and a real desire to succeed and really have a goal. My desire to succeed as an engineer. I don't think the kids ever appreciate what a difference that made in our lifestyle. Anyway, while I have skipped a few things, I've hit most of the highlights up until we hit our final destination, the Seattle area. When I left California, I left the most interesting job I ever had. In the short time I was there, I put a model in the supersonic tunnel, a 10-foot by 10-foot cross-section, with 4 rocket motors using a mix of JP4 and liquid oxygen to simulate a Polaris missile in flight. Another fellow I devised a system for, taking gas samples off the base of a missile. After that job, I was assigned the job of designing a rocket engine, a small one, with a throat diameter about 3 inches, using red fuming nitric acid and liquid oxygen. I left there for more money at Boeing. Lockheed was in a money freeze until I told them I was leaving. Then they offered me more money. I left. When I arrived in Seattle in 1960, we found a house, a 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, small rambler. We lived there for 3 years, and in 1963 we moved to Redmond House. That fall, Dad, Randy, Terry, and I went to the Cascades hunting for deer. We had a great adventure, even though we didn't fire a shot. Every time Dad came to visit, we would go hiking somewhere. He always seemed to enjoy it. We enjoyed that old house, 5 bedrooms, 3 full baths, and etc. Kids got to run the woods and have good times. My career at Boeing started in 1960 in Renton, when I was hired into preliminary design to work on the 727. I was put to work designing the front and rear spar forgings, then the front and rear spar bulkheads, including the wing to body attachments. Then design of the skin, stingers, and frames in the 46 section. My first experience at aircraft design, and it was a shocker. Pretty intense. When the design was over, I was asked to move into an administrative job. I eventually ran the engineering reports for the 727 warranty program. Moved out in 1967 to the thrust reverser program design, and from there to Everett to work on the 747 warranty program. Boeing layoffs started then, reduced from 135,000 employees to 35,000 employees. Many good people laid off or took big pay cuts. Didn't affect me. The director of engineering that I had dealt with for several years told my boss, no pay cut and keep him. When the warranty program died down, I moved into customer engineering and stayed there for 15 years, traveling all over Europe and to parts of Africa, including Libya and Gabon. Dottie came over and joined me to a jaunt to Italy. We traveled from Rome to Pompeii and by rail to Venice, Florence, and Torino, to Paris, and took the ferry to Ireland, rented a car and drove around Southern Ireland and home. We also took a solo trip to Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. We both enjoyed traveling. I left customer engineering and transferred to Renton for a short time, then returned to Everett to work on the Air Force One project for 3 years. When this was over, I transferred to a test organization for 3 years and retired in 1993 after 33 years at Boeing. During my time at Boeing, besides work, night classes, and participating in raising 6 kids and ensuring they were properly disciplined, I also found time to run 15 marathons, numerous half marathons, to climb Mount Rainier, a number of routes, and many other mountains, to organize 2 climbs of McKinley. I also enjoyed cycling to work and long bike rides and took kids on several backpacking trips. All of my kids learned to enjoy the outdoors. Some of my most enjoyable times have been in the mountains with my family. I have skied since 1961 or 1962, and Dottie and I joined the Hayak Ski Patrol. All of the kids learned to ski and several enjoyed it. Jimmy Jr. and I still ski whenever we can. I have always been a hunter. My dad bought a .22 rifle when I was 12, and I have hunted various critters ever since. Duck hunting, quail, pheasant, grouse, deer, elk, caribou, goat, and antelope. Several years have gone by without firing a shot, but the enjoyment of getting out and looking has never wavered. We sold the Redmond house, rented for a couple years in downtown Kirkland, and finally bought a condo, a townhouse, in South Kirkland. Quite a nice place. We did several remodeling jobs there, enlarged the deck, and added the new upstairs, built a loft out over the garage, and in general, enjoyed the place, but finally outgrew it. Bought a place in Snohomish, a 3-car garage with a bonus room, which is mine, a sewing room that was Dottie's, and I have hunting trophies in my room, and Dottie has quilts all over the house. I have many memories of life on the farm, life in school, high school in Ottawa, time in the Navy and Air Force, and studying in college and meeting my soulmate. Raising a family and trying to provide the family with the basics and sometimes the extras. Trying to keep our marriage solid with all the problems we had, such as Tom's surgery. Dottie and I managed to keep our bond and raise good kids.